Julia, thank you for joining us.
Sure, you're welcome. Happy to do it.
Oh, appreciate it. Welcome to Ohio State. So, in today's day and age, there are a huge array of storytellers, anything from filmmakers to YouTube creators and social media content creators. Do you have any advice for students who are coming up in today's day and age about filmmaking?
Yes,
What would that
yes, I
be?
do. Okay, well, I live in Ohio, and presumably many of the people who see this are from the Midwest or maybe even from Ohio. And they're probably mostly younger, like in their 20s, teens and 20s. So, one thing I would say is you are the only ones who can tell stories of people who are from the Midwest, who are in their 20s right now in 2020. You have a unique voice that I cannot have, you could not have. You don't know what it's like to be 20 years old in 2020 in the world of today and living in small town Ohio, Columbus, whatever. So I think it's very important to honor that special attribute you have, that special experience you have. You're not in LA, you're not in New York, so don't pretend you are. Don't try to copy things you've already seen. Don't try to be a knockoff of something that probably costs 10 times as much money as you could ever have. Use your own experience, use your own voice. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've also made fiction, and I taught for a long time at Wright State University, and most of my students made fiction. So when I talk to them about writing a script or making a documentary, I always encourage them to think about what are stories from your own family, from your own block, from your neighborhood. Who are unique individuals? Who's going through something hard right now? Or what is there a family secret? You'd be surprised how many students that I had told of brothers or sisters they never met because of divorce, and they went and they always wanted to meet them. Or even adopted kids wanting to meet their parents. Or, various, one of my students had an aunt who had suddenly disappeared, and nobody ever talked about it. It turned out she had a child out of wedlock. The child was taken away. She ended up committing suicide. The family knew nothing, would never talk with her about it. So I always said to people, you don't need to be a knockoff. Make stories from your own experience and your own life. And again, you have a unique voice being who you are right now. So that's one thing I would say.
Who can tell a
That's,
better story than yourself about yourself and what you know, right?
well, and also most of the storytellers out there are in New York and LA. They don't have any clue what it's like here. They think they do. They can fly in and spend a few days and shoot a few things, and it's mostly pretty bogus. We all know that, but we're authentic. We're authentic. You should be your authentic self. The other thing I always say, and it's very brief, is what you make has to really matter to you. It has to really matter, especially if you want to be a documentary filmmaker or you want to make fiction film, like long form fiction is very hard, very, very hard. So if it doesn't mean a lot to you, you'll never get through it. It's too much work. So,
And as you were saying, being true to yourself. So, as a filmmaker, do you feel personal film viewing of somebody else's work and being critical to these other people's work is important to the creative process?
absolutely. Oh, yeah, I think it's very important to study the history of our art form.
Right.
It's a fairly young art form, but it's over 100 years old now. And it's very important to study the various phases it's gone through and also to study the voices from various countries, various cultures, because they're all going to be speaking from their cultural framework. And it's important that we know that. And not just French cinema and Italian cinema, which are important, but what about cinema from Tunisia or Japan or China, that we don't really get to see that much in, at the mall theaters, but you have to seek it out. I think it's very important to see work, to see other people's work and study it, learn about it, yeah.
And who would you say your major influence is? Anybody out there that really guided you on your career path? Do you have an influence that really took your career in a specific path, whether it be a director, a cinematographer, anything?
When I was coming up as a young woman, I started making films when I was 21 or 22. There were no women out there, and most of the men just didn't think women could make films, didn't think women could hold cameras, they were too heavy, didn't think we could do sound because it was too complicated. So I did not have any mentors, honestly. There were no, I'm a working class kid, I'm from a small town. Who was out there who came from my experience? I was interested in telling stories of women. Who was out there, I will say once I got started and I started meeting other women of my age, we sort of banded together and started to talk to each other and learn from each other. So that was great. And I think that still goes on. But I wouldn't say I have a main influence. I'm sorry. I mean, I love a lot of filmmakers' work,
Yeah,
but
yeah. As a collective, right? Yes.
Yeah.
It's just an art form in itself.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with Catherine Bigelow. When she won the Oscar, I unexpectedly just started to cry because that had never happened.
Yes.
And also I loved her work, and I loved how she came up. There's a lot of filmmakers whose work I love, but it's like I've never met them.
We'll have to say I was excited when you won your Oscar. So congratulations, and thank you for joining us here at The Ohio State University. We really appreciate that.
Hey, could I say one thing?
Absolutely.
You remember, I had a speech that was memorized for the Oscars.
Yes.
That Steve and I, my partner Steve Bogenar and I,
Right.
of course, wrote together very carefully, memorized it. And when I said the word Ohio, there was an uproar in the audience.
Always is.
And I just naturally responded, "Go Buckeyes." That was definitely not in my speech. And I really was referring to Go Ohio.
Correct.
Not necessarily the football team.
We're all Buckeyes.
We're all Buckeyes,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of
Great.
that.
It put a smile on my face when you said it. So.
Good. I'm glad.
Yes. Well, thank you
Okay.
again for joining us. Appreciate that.